Hello, and welcome to the Peace is an Action Verb podcast. I'm here with Terry Todd Ingram, who is a friend of mine online, like so many of my good friends are. And Terry and I have known each other for, I think, 5 or 6 years now, and been a part of online conversations in a shared space with many other women, and also just the two of us back and forth on Facebook and Facebook Messenger. And I know Terry to be a mom, a grandma, a daughter, a wife, and a phenomenal human being. And so just that's my introduction for you, Terry. Would you like to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Okay, so I'm 69 years old. I'll be 70 this next year. I have four kids of my own. I was divorced when they were fairly small and worked full time as an accountant in a big corporation. And after my kids all went off to school, off to college, and were all gone out of the house, I moved back to Sacramento where my mother was, and my father had passed away the year before. So maybe it was the year before he had passed away, and she was not faring well by herself. So I moved here, and um, I met my current husband while I was living with my mom, and we hit it off right away. And once my mom got a little bit more settled, I moved in with Bob, and we got married and has had a wonderful time. And with Bob has had three children. His oldest daughter passed away a couple years ago. She was 52. She had breast cancer. But
Oh,
he has
sorry.
another daughter in Florida who has four children, and she has two grandchildren. So we have two great grandchildren.
Mm.
And then his youngest was his son, and they live not too far from us and have two children. So we have all of those. And then I have four children. My oldest is in her 50s and has no children, is married, but they decided they didn't want children. She's very much into, she has her own business that is about um, helping women to fully experience what it is to be a woman,
Mm.
um, to get over the stigma of you have to do this and you have to do that, but to explore and discover who they really are as people. That's what her main business is. And
And it,
she's also a massage therapist. And that's my oldest. And then the next one in line is my oldest son. Him and well, I should say, he grew up and had a lot of issues with me. He is gay, married, and they have one little child. They live not too far from me, but I never get to see the baby. I've never only seen pictures of it. And he thinks I'm a terrible person, so I don't get to see him. That's really painful. Then
yeah.
the next one down, my third child is a daughter. She lives also very close. She has two adorable boys. That one is going into is just started high school, and the other one is just starting junior high. And I spend a lot of time with them.
Mhm.
And then my youngest, Matthew, he's married and they live in Boise, Idaho, and they have three little kids, three little boys. Well, I shouldn't say little, they're getting pretty big, and they're very large in size. They were very large as babies. They're huge boys, but they're not fat. They're just muscular and big, but their dad is 6'3", so it's not particularly surprising. And I get to go visit them in Idaho later this month. So that's my family, and I have a dog and a cat, and I live here in Rancho Cordova. I live a half a block from the American River Bike Trail, and I go down there
Oh,
every day and
wow.
either walk or ride our trikes now that we
Yeah.
got.
Yeah.
So
There's so
that's
much peacefulness in being with water, being along
yes,
water, being with the trees.
water. Yeah, in the
Yeah.
wild space. That's to me that is a gift toward staying healthy and spiritually whole.
And in the greater Sacramento area, there's an incredible network along the major riverways that you have there. Isn't that right?
Yes,
There's parklands
yes.
that flank the
Oh, yes.
river,
Mm-hmm,
and
mm-hmm.
the ability to ride your bike, take a walk, bring your canoe or your paddle board or whatever
Yes,
water
yes.
sport.
We have kayaks, and
Yeah.
we've had them in the river at other times, but the problem with putting them in the river is first of all, the American River right now is lower than I've ever seen it in all my life, and I've
Mm, yeah.
been in the river a lot. So in most areas now, or in a lot of areas, we can't even take our kayaks because they have um, pedal power, and so there's big fins that hang down and they
Mhm.
hit the bottom. It's
Oh,
just
okay.
too shallow.
Yeah.
So we haven't been able to take them down there, but we're hoping to get big rains this year and big snow up in the mountains, so we get the river comes up, the level of the river comes up.
We're all hoping and praying, all of us here in California, for the water to heal, for
Yes,
the water
yes,
cycle.
yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Terry, I thank you for the brief introduction of your family and your relationships with your kids. One of the things that you have done for me that has been very peace inducing for me is been, been willing to talk about your experience of being a mom, and how there's just you bring a humility to it, which has helped me so much in being kinder in my thoughts towards my own mother. It's, I think, you are a daughter, you are a mother, you are a grandmother, so you have that full spectrum of human experience. I got as far as being a daughter and said, okay, that's enough for me. i'm not I'm not going to be a mother. That's too much. I think the bravest people in the world are parents, and I think the second bravest people in the world are children. That's my sense of things.
It's a job. It's a job. It's a commitment to another human being. I mean, to be a mother is a commitment to another human. To be a daughter is a commitment to another human being. Multiples. To be a sister is a commitment. All of those things are
Mm,
commitment to life and to being part of other people's lives.
yeah, yeah. And when you have children young, or not even necessarily when you're having them young, but to go through that experience and that level of responsibility. And then you were mentioning before we started the recording, you did that as a single mom for a number of years. There's
Yes.
got to have been and we were also talking about how your life is much less scheduled now than it was back
Hmm.
then. So there's got to have been a lot of using your brain to set a schedule that could keep you afloat. And so, what was that like for you in the younger years with your small kids?
It was it was trying when they were really small. Um, I had my first child I had when I was 18 years old.
Mm,
Then I
mhm,
didn't have any more until I was in my later 20s.
mhm.
So she's 8 years older than the next child.
Wow,
So
that's a big gap for her to the other.
yes.
Yeah.
So when they were all like once we got once I got them to like 4 or 5 years old, preschool age, that's when I started having to take care of them by myself. That's when I went through a divorce and
Mm,
they were little
mhm,
and I had to work. So I went to work at night
mm.
so that I could get them ready for school, get them off to school, and I slept while they were at school. So I slept a few hours. And when I first started working, my youngest one was still at home.
Mhm,
He was just 4, he wasn't in school yet.
mhm.
And so I would come home and get the other kids all off to school and fix him some breakfast. And then we'd turn on Sesame Street or whatever programs he wanted to watch on TV because I would lay on the couch then
Mhm,
and sort of nap on and off.
mhm.
And then I didn't get to sleep. And then usually that would be like 2, maybe 3 hours of on and off sleep. And then at 8 o'clock, they went to bed and I would go to bed and sleep for 2 hours. So I had to get up at 10 to get ready to go to work. And
So
my
you had,
daughter was in high school by then. So she was there taking care of them at night.
wow. So not only did you have a schedule that was very, very regimented, but that schedule included two uninterrupted hours of sleep. and then some
Well, and I
catnapping.
interrupted, and then catnapping. Yeah,
Oh my goodness.
that went on for 5 years.
Wow. Wow. And then and meanwhile your oldest daughter was there helping provide that level of stability and
Yes.
you know, we in this country we start babysitting around age 13, I guess officially.
Hmm.
I mean, if I'm remembering
Hmm.
back to my life in the 1980s as a teenager. And so she
Yeah.
could.
And they were in bed and they were asleep. So was she,
Yeah.
she just stayed up, finished her homework or whatever she had to do, and then she went to bed. And then I got home before they had to leave in the morning.
And so
So
there was a bit of an overlap of her helping you mother in a certain sense, like she was stepping up
yes.
and growing up and
Hmm.
and coming into that level of responsibility
One
to
of the reasons,
help
yeah,
you.
one of the reasons she decided not to have any children.
Was she because she kind of already did, right? She like
She
with
did.
the
Yeah.
that age
Right.
difference is more like being an aunt, really,
Yes.
than
Uh-huh.
being a sister. And so, you know, so one of the relationships that I have observed, because you know how when we have Facebook and we have an opportunity to almost journal with an audience
Hmm.
in a way that maybe before internet we would have had a diary or talked to a close friend, or we would have had these reflections in a way that we weren't necessarily having an audience.
Hmm.
I have had the joy of being in contact with your daughter. We're talking about Jessica, your oldest, who
Yes.
and watching her share her gifts or reading her gifts and she's an author. She
Hmm.
helps people journal.
Hmm.
She Hello to your husband. Hello, Bob.
She's saying hi to you.
Hi, I'm Christine. Nice to meet you.
This is Christine.
Howdy, Christine.
Howdy.
How do you get so small?
Yeah, I know. I'm actually rather large. There's 5'9" of me.
I didn't know you were that tall.
Yeah, I'm that tall. Um, so I have had the joy of of absorbing Jessica's reflections and her teachings, and
Hmm.
then the extra joy of watching the two of you interact, Terry, and for you to read and respond to Jessica's prompts. So a lot of what I see Jessica doing is asking some very deep inward guided questions
Hmm.
that some of them really get your head scratching. It's like, wow, I've never even thought about that. But then they drop us down so deep, and she does work with the womb and getting women or helping women to connect with the womb. And so there's this fascinating opportunity I have to watch you two interact with these questions. And I've just noticed you show your daughter so much respect in engaging in the questions that she's asking and sharing. You know, so she'll pose a question about even like how might I'm paraphrasing, and I wish that she were here to read her own work to us at this moment, but how might we be impacted by that moment of conception with our mother and our father? And
Oh,
and was that a joyful experience for our mother? And how does that then form our embryo and our experience moving forward? And how do we hold that in our psyche and heal whatever there might have been or not been? If she goes deep, she goes
yes,
deep. And
yes.
so and so here you are, the two of you, you know, lovingly interacting with each other, and then you have an audience, you know, because it's Facebook. And
Hmm.
so I have found that to be healing to watch you be there with your daughter in that way. And you're saying that you have a more painful and estranged relationship with your oldest son. And so I would be analogous in your family structure to your older son. For my mom, you know, I've been the one
Your
who has
relationship with your mom is
right.
difficult.
Well, and I've largely not been there. You know,
Mm.
as an adult, I've largely not been in her life. And
Hmm.
so to to watch how you interact with your children and to watch how you are humble with them and self-reflective with them and open to their deep process of peeling back the layers of ancestry, starting with you. And that
Hmm.
you've been open to that. And so I just want to thank you, because that's helped me look at how do I be more forgiving towards my mother? How do I be more open to her as a human being?
Hmm.
And you know, you're describing your process of 2 hours of sleep, you know, raising raising children. And I think I cannot function less than 6, to be quite honest. I'm pretty much a disaster to be around if I've had less than 6 hours of sleep. And I know not all mothers have the level of structure and hard work and deprivation that you had in those 5 years of single parenting. And yet I think every single mother can relate to the sensation of being stretched thin and working super hard just to hold it all together. I think every single mother. Yeah. And yet every single child, I think, can also relate to, or adult looking back at childhood can also relate to, yeah, I could have used more attention, or I could have used more this or that. And so I want to thank you for holding the both end of that experience. I just see you bearing witness to that, with a lot of love and grace.
Well, my kids, we've all had discussions. My oldest son, I feel like he doesn't quite get it. And I'm hoping that my other children all understand that I was doing everything I could to mother them and to keep a roof over our head and food on the table. And the other 3 all get it, but my oldest son, he has his own issues and he can't quite get past those. So I just have to give him space and know that, and hope that eventually, I'm hoping that now that he's a parent, as he moves forward as a parent, he will realize that parenting, there is no set program to parenting that says this is the way it has to be done and you have to do it that way or else, because life throws obstacles in front of you that you can't anticipate, and you have to do the best you can. You just do what you feel like you can do it as much as you can, and hope for the best, and hope that your kids understand that that's just the best you could do.
Right. And I think besides hoping that your kids can understand that, in that statement, there's a deep wish for their healing, because to understand that is also to be able to let go of the pain of resenting that it wasn't perfect. And I don't mean perfect in like a judgmental kind of a way. I mean, we all have a deep sense of what's perfect, and that's important to understand that.
Right.
And yet
he just has different expectations of what his childhood should have been.
Yeah.
And it wasn't that.
Yeah.
And he blames me.
Yeah.
And I understand that. But at the same time, I love him. And I don't want to try and force him to confront his own self. He has to do that in his own time. I mean, none of us want to be pushed or coerced into accepting something that we aren't ready to accept. And so that to me is one of why the action word, the peace action word acceptance, is really meaningful to me. That's part of the reason.
Yeah. And so before we started recording, you mentioned you had added that verb, and I've written it down here. And you know what else I'm hearing, Terry, that's related to the peace verb of acceptance or accepting, is practicing right timing. And how internal that there's a going within of that we might want someone to get to a place of self-understanding or self-learning, but we can't push that agenda or that timing on any other human being.
Right.
That we all have this internal clock, and we also have an internal trajectory, and our life, we're following a life path that no one else can really see, right?
Right.
And so you're acknowledging that, and that acknowledgement and that acceptance of that is a beautiful peace verb. Yeah.
And also, I think that I can't push that. I can't push my mental agenda onto my spirit. My spirit knows what I need to do and what my purpose is here and where I'm going and what the path is. And in a younger time in my life, I tried to live up to and fit the mold that I thought I was supposed to fit. I tried to be the mother that my mother was. I tried to be um, the wife that my husband thought at the time thought I should be.
Mhm.
And I wasn't. I was neglecting to be me,
Mm. Mm.
to acknowledge and accept who I was as me. I was trying to fit somebody else's mold. And it was really freeing when I finally realized I didn't have to do that.
Wow. So I want to maybe if we can take a moment and go back and reflect on all of this that you just said. Your mom, so what was Sacramento like? I think you grew up in Sacramento area, is that right?
I was born in Sacramento, and then from the time I was 2, my dad was in the Navy until I was 2 years old.
Uh-huh.
And when he got back, then because my mom was living with her mom
Okay.
in Sacramento,
Yeah.
and my dad and her had gone to high school together,
Uh-huh.
and then got married early, and then he went off to be in the Navy, and I was conceived when he came home for a visit,
Yeah.
and and it was during the Korean War.
Ah,
And so he was in the Navy and over in the Korean area.
yeah.
And then when he was home on leave, they conceived me, and then I was born when he got to come home for leave for 2 weeks when my mom was due, and I was born.
Wow.
And then he didn't come home until I was 2 years old.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah.
So
So
your mom was in effect a single mother, and
for
and
the
your
first couple of years,
and your
yeah,
grandma was there to help too,
right.
and so I'm just assuming, so this is the 1950s, the Korean
Hmm.
War, yeah. So your mom being a mom in the 1950s and you being a mom in the 1970s are such different worlds, and you were still
Yes.
holding yourself to this expectation of mother, of the definition of mother,
Yes.
I imagine there was a lot of like home cooked meals that you were expecting to produce, and I don't know if your mom sewed, but I'm just
Yes.
imagining like
So,
what you were expecting yourself to accomplish.
yes. Because she was a stay-at-home mom, and
Yeah.
she stayed at home. She worked outside the home for about 3 months when I was 10, 11, 10 or 11. And that was it. She couldn't keep up with everything.
Yeah.
And so she quit. My dad didn't really want her to go to work.
Mhm.
But she made home cooked meals
Mhm.
and baked. We had homemade desserts every night. And
Every night you had homemade desserts every night.
yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. And we
Wow.
once my dad came home from the Navy, then we moved to the Bay Area, and
Oh,
we
okay.
moved all around in the Bay Area. So
Okay.
we moved around as
Yeah.
his job. He worked for IBM, and
Uh-huh.
so there were times when he was working in Berkeley. There were times when he was working in San Francisco, and we, just kind of moved
Mhm.
around to wherever it would be a decent commute for him.
Mhm. Mhm.
Yeah, I had these expectations that as a wife and a mother, I was supposed to do all the things my mother did, but at the same time, I was working full time.
Wow. And I think if you look back in history, so your daughter, who is a healer and a teacher and helps people look at ancestral healing,
Hmm.
if you can think about it, life probably didn't change from mother to daughter to mother to daughter to mother to daughter until the Industrial Revolution, pretty much. And then there's been even more of an acceleration in this last century of the changes and expectations of the role of womanhood and the role of motherhood. And so it wasn't probably too bad of an assumption to want to be like one's mother until
No,
maybe, the last three or so generations.
right.
Yeah.
And yeah, and it was just a major revelation for me when I realized that I didn't have to be the way my mother was, even
Mm.
though I would have liked that.
Yeah.
This wasn't possible in the life that I was living.
Right. Right. And so you talk about being an accountant in the middle of the night for a corporation while also making sure that there was a roof and there was food on the table.
Hmm.
And And so it's, an accountant, there's just so much linearity and structure to that role, and tying up loose ends and tracking details down and balancing sheets and all of that. That's very structured. So you were in that role in that world, and then basically doing both, which I think is very much the story of your generation of women, being in the workforce and also being in the home, and somehow finding that balance point. And I think balance is a peace verb, isn't it?
Yes, that's very good. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. So I appreciate that. Is there more that you want to say about acceptance that was something we wanted to make sure we spent time delving into?
Acceptance is such an incredible peace word, a verb that speaks to me a lot, because like I said, my acceptance of myself was a major revelation in my life. My acceptance of the way my first husband, who he was very difficult, because I expected that all men were like my dad, and my dad was this very loving, kind, gentle person. And the man that I married initially was not that. And in fact, he was abusive, but I couldn't even recognize the abuse because I thought that I must be doing something wrong for him to behave the way he was behaving.
So you were, well, I think for you to do that was also a peace action, because you were already demonstrating accountability. And even though it was misplaced accountability, even though you weren't actually responsible for his disruptive and mean and angry behavior, you were still looking inward to see, how can I be accountable? How can I be responsible? And so in that, you were demonstrating peace verbs from the very beginning. And yet you got to a point where you realized, wait, this isn't me. What was that like, Terry? Was it like an awakening? Was it like a moment that you can actually remember? Like, what was that like?
It happened over a period of probably slowly, over probably a total of 10 years. It took me to
10 years. Okay.
to
Yeah.
really grasp the fact of who I was and who I was not, and to separate myself from my ex-husband to the point where I could see myself as separate from him and not who he saw me as. Same with my mother. My mother, I think she saw me more who I was, but I saw her as the role model of who I was supposed to be.
Oh,
So,
wow. Yeah.
So the acceptance had to come from within me to say, my mother was my mother. I don't have to be her.
Yeah.
And my life doesn't work when I try to be her. So
Gosh.
that was a real, it took a long time to accept both. Those were my two sources of learning how to be accepting, what acceptance was about, to allow the other person to be who they were and not have to take responsibility for who they were.
There's so much there, Terry. Thank you so much for laying out that timeline for us, because I think a lot of people feel like, why can't I get my act together? And why is this taking me so long? And to see other human beings that have come so far, done so well, living in a healthy way, in a happy way, in healthy relationships, to realize it could take years. And so you're pointing out two really interesting dynamics here, I think are very, very relatable for so many people. One of them is, someone else is upset, it must be me. And so to be able to find that healthy boundary of, oh, I'm not responsible for someone else's upsetness all the time. Maybe sometimes, maybe I have some role. And you started with that. You started with looking at, I must be responsible. What can I do to adjust? What can I do to change? And then coming to an awareness over a period of time, it's not all me. It's not always what I can do. It could be, this person is an inaccurate mirror for me. Right. And this person is their own person with their own emotions. So you've got that. And then you've got this other experience of, your mom already accepted you. Your mom already saw you. She wasn't wanting you to be her, but you loved her, admired her, wanted to emulate her. And so there's this self-definition process that you went through, and I'm sure are still going through. It's never really over, right? But to come over a period of time to realize, oh, I'm allowed to be imperfect and perfect. I'm allowed to be to find my own path, to define myself. And I don't have to keep everyone around me happy, and I don't have to be like everybody else around me. Bravo. Bravo.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And right, it never ends because our situations change and we grow and change. And so there's always this process that's going on of acceptance of who I am, acceptance who other people in my life are. And without that acceptance, there isn't peace. There's not inner peace for me. There's not peace in my relationship with others who I'm not accepting the way they are.
Right. Right. So that's powerful, and it ripples out, and it creates a calmness that would not be there otherwise. And
I think it opens the door for change on both sides, for change in the relationship where if you're not accepting, there's a resistance of the person who you're not accepting, and they don't communicate with you as well, and you don't communicate with them as well. So it opens doors when you can get to that place of being accepting of who another person is.
Yeah. Yeah. And of their timeline, and of their trajectory being sacred unto themselves, and not for any other person to dictate.
Right. Right.
Yeah. And so I have absorbed your peace energy and benefited from your peace energy in a way that has really helped me evolve my own thoughts towards my mother.
Wonderful. I'm glad to hear it.
Yeah. And you know, we are at a place where we're making peaceful attempts in each other's direction, you know, really reaching out to each other. And I think both of us are not only trying to see the other person, but really trying to be open to the other person as well. And so you have been a powerful part of helping me get there. And I want to thank you
wouldn't
for
have
that.
known that. That's wonderful. I'm glad to hear.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like, isn't it interesting how you wouldn't have known that, right? Because you were just being you. And also being a good friend when I needed one. And whenever I've reached out to you and asked for your help, you've always been there and been present with me. So thank you.
Well, I'm glad. I enjoy you.
Thank you. I can't say that I'm always enjoyable, but I I think sometimes when, you know, you're not my mom, although you are the same generation, you know, I'm more or less the same age as your kids. And something about that degree of separation is it allows for a little bit more enjoyment when there's less direct strings, I think.
Yes. And plus we don't live near enough each other that we spend too much time with each other.
Yeah,
like online, it's pretty easy. You know, you don't get into my face and I don't get into your face.
And that's another piece, Verb, isn't it? Finding the right. It's about balance, and it's about personal space, and finding the balance there. And I think with friends, it's a little bit easier. It's definitely easier online because you can always just turn your computer or phone off. You can decide how much time you want to be in a Facebook environment. With family, it's harder to negotiate that, although it's still possible.
Yes, it is possible, but it takes both sides to be willing.
Yeah. Yeah. Or at least there's definitely more ground to be gained when both sides are willing.
Right. You can only do so much if it's one-sided. Like with my son, I love him dearly, but you know, he is not ready or able to have a relationship with me. And so I just have to be patient and wait and hope that someday that will be the case.
Right. And so waiting and hoping are also peace verbs. And in combination with each other, right? Waiting, patience, being patient, and hoping. Yeah, because you could hope and be impatient, and that wouldn't really get you to the same place.
No, because then there's pressure.
Or you could wait and not be hopeful, and that also wouldn't get you to the same place.
Right. Or not be accepting. If you're not accepting of the fact that the other person isn't ready, then
Yeah.
you're gonna be pressuring them or making them feel pressure, even though you're not trying to pressure them,
Right.
because you're anxiously waiting on that in the background, feeling like, come on, we got to do this.
Yeah.
Where if you can just accept that it's not there, it's not happening now, and maybe it'll happen in the future, then it takes pressure off both people,
It does, and it allows
and
that
nobody's
for,
to blame.
and nobody's to blame. So how interesting that is. I'm trying to see if I have a verb here for that. I think it's, oh gosh. It's interesting. It's a little bit like the opposite of being accountable in in the recognition that there's situations that just are. So it's like you don't
Mhm.
even have to look for someone who needs to be responsible for making it right or making it wrong. It's really, it gets back at what does it mean to accept?
Yes, it's a part of acceptance is, you know, saying, okay, this is what it is, accepting the situation as it is, not just the person, but the situation. Okay, this is what it is. So
Mm.
you accept it and know that maybe it'll change, but maybe it won't. You just have to accept the way it is.
You have to accept it, and I think also you have to move. Like, so we were talking about being near the American River Parkway,
Mhm.
and that you and Bob get to go out on your recumbent bicycles, which sound like so much fun, just to be down there low on the ground, and you can probably feel the water even more when you're at that level, like the breeze coming off of the water. And
Mhm.
so you one one accepts, and one doesn't necessarily need to stay there and dwell on it. One can move. One,
Right. Yeah, you don't get stuck that way.
yeah,
Acceptance allows for freedom.
that's wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you.
So I was wondering if we could shift gears a little bit into talking about bread.
Bread, I'd love
Yeah.
to.
Because you're talking about your mom, and I feel like I should try to transport myself back in time and be a dinner guest at your house when your mom was baking a new dessert every night. That just
It
sounds
wasn't
like,
always new, but we always had dessert every night that she would make.
so a
Sometimes,
homemade dessert.
sometimes if yeah, but sometimes we just have ice cream. But most nights there was something and then ice cream with it,
Yeah.
or you could, if somebody didn't like a particular thing that she made, they could have just ice cream. She always had ice cream in the house. She loved ice cream.
Wow. I think there's a piece verb in there somewhere of like always having ice cream in the house. Like, that feels very lovely.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I know you bake, and I know
Mhm.
that you have been baking gluten-free bread.
I have, but most recently I've been not making gluten-free bread. I seem to have um, healed my body of the need to not have gluten.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah. So now
We love gluten.
yeah, my husband says we love gluten. Yeah. So, but I know that you still are doing gluten-free bread.
No,
Yes.
no, I don't do gluten-free. I was vegan for about 4 years, twice in my life, once in my
Mhm.
20s and then once in my 40s. But I've never been gluten-free, or at least not that I can remember for very long. I do
Mm-hmm.
sourdough. I bake sourdough.
Yes. Yes. I
So
was doing gluten-free sourdough for a while.
I wanted to just touch on baking as a way to be connected to family, and the visceral memories that come from the taste, the smell, the routine, and the ritual of the baking. And I'm wondering, did your mom also bake bread? Was that something you were remembering?
She did on occasion, but she didn't do it on a regular basis because she liked baking desserts.
Hmm.
And we had a large yard.
Mm.
When I'm remembering my years, there was this house that we lived in. We moved every 3 or 4 years,
Hmm.
but this one house that we lived in is where I remember my mother doing the most baking.
Hmm.
And we had a huge yard. She had a vegetable garden, and we had walnut trees.
Oh my
And
goodness.
so she would make all these desserts with walnuts
Yeah.
because we had walnuts. I mean, we harvested in the fall, but then we'd have a store of walnuts all year. So
Right.
us kids used to have to crack nuts so mom could make something.
Yeah. Yeah. That, that reminds me of when I was a very young child, there would always be about 4 to 6 year old child that had to sit on the ice cream churner because,
Oh,
it was it was a double bucket. The inside bucket was where you had
mhm.
the ice cream, and the outside bucket held ice water, like salted ice water that was really
Right.
cold. And then you would
Mhm.
crank it, but the lid required some kind of weight, and a small child was the perfect amount of weight. And boy, that was cold. So so you had to crack walnuts, and I can relate to the
Sit on the
activity.
ice bucket. Yeah.
And so you did a lot of walnut cracking, and I'm assuming climbing the walnut tree.
Oh, we each had there were 8 walnut trees in the yard, and there were at that time in our life there were 3 children. My mother had a fourth child, very late when I was already 16 years old.
Oh
So
wow. Yeah.
she is Jessica's, my oldest daughter's aunt, but they're only 2 years different in age.
Wow.
Yeah. So but when we were living in this house with all the walnut trees, there were just 3 kids, and we each got to pick a tree, and then my dad helped us build tree forts in each of them, and he made these rope ladders that we could climb up to get up into the tree,
That's
into
magical.
our little into our little tree house. We each had a tree house and a walnut tree. And then I babysat for the neighbors across the street, and this will be funny to you, but I got paid 10 cents an hour. That was a big deal.
Talk about inflation. I can't even imagine
But
what kids are making right now for
yeah,
babysitting.
yeah. But 10 cents an hour, and there were 2 little kids, they were a lot of work. But I wanted more spending money. So
Uh-huh.
my dad said I could harvest all the walnuts from my tree that had the
Yeah.
tree for them, harvest all the walnuts and do the processing of them. You had to dry them, and then you had to take the outside hulls off. Then you had
Yeah.
to dry them some more.
Yeah.
And then once that was done, I could sell them.
And did you have rubber gloves at that time? Like, or did you just get black
No,
fingers from
I had
all the
black
walnut?
fingers all
Yeah.
fall. I had black fingers.
Yeah.
And the kids at school would tease me because my fingers were all black. But I said, yeah,
Because
but I have money.
yeah, right. Fair enough. Fair enough.
Yeah,
I have walnut
yeah,
hands, but I have money in my pockets
yeah,
as well.
yeah. So I had this I processed them all, and then I sold all the walnuts to Diamond Walnuts.
That's
They
a
had,
huge amount of work.
yeah, it was a lot of work, and I was only 10 or 11 years old.
And yet you had this relationship. And by the way, we will get back to bread. We just are taking a little bit of a tour around trees.
Yeah, it's okay.
So you had this relationship with this tree, and
Yeah,
a tree that you could climb up and be inside of, a tree that gave you these gifts of walnuts, and that you put in the hard work of then taking those walnuts out to the world so that they could feed other families. And what a
yes,
intimate and beautiful relationship with a tree.
yes. I have from a very early age. Trees were my friends. My
Mm,
walnut tree, all the walnut trees in our yard were friends to me,
mm.
and trees everywhere. After that, everywhere we lived, I had trees as friends.
Yes, and how important to say that out loud, and how important to deeply appreciate those friendships. And
Yeah, yeah.
the,
It shaped my life. It gave me a connection to nature that most people don't experience.
and yet, because trees are in most environments, they are a doorway into connection with the larger earth.
Hmm. Hmm.
And that's amazing that you had that experience with them. And so we'll get back to trees again, but let's return to baking. um, so as a baker myself, I don't know, it's been probably 20 years, you know how time flies, that I've been tinkering with sourdough, and I'm not a recipe follower. And
Hmm.
so I've had my own journey with, which loaves have to go to the compost, which loaves become bread pudding or croutons, which loaves are need extra toasting because they were underbaked, et cetera. So there's a certain trajectory and journey that I've gone through. And I have seen some of your, photos of bread that you have baked. And I remember a particular batch, it was gluten-free, and you
Mhm.
had scored them and they had risen perfectly. And they looked like something coming out of a food stylist's photography lab. And I was like, wow, this is phenomenal. And I know that there's got to have been a whole journey of tinkering and learning and trial and error to get to the point where you could figure out how to manage that.
Yeah, it was an interesting journey because I was determined to do sourdough and gluten free,
Mhm.
and I had not really. My mother never made sourdough bread. That was
Oh,
not something she did. She just always had yeast in the refrigerator.
yeah.
And I don't know if my grandmother. I think my grandmother, who was born and raised in Italy,
Yeah.
and they made bread on a daily basis.
Yeah.
And my grandmother was, I think, the second or third child out of 14
14
children.
kids. Right.
Yes. And birth control wasn't an issue. They were a good Catholic family.
Yeah. Right. Right.
Lots of children. Anyway, her aunt, my grandmother's aunt, lived with them. She was not married. She lived with them and she did most of the cooking. And because her mother, my great grandmother, was taking care of all these children, and because
Oh,
my grandmother was one of the older ones, she got to do all the cooking with the aunt. So she made bread, she did all of those kinds of things, and she was, she had to help because there were all these little babies running around.
sure, sure. And I think what people who live in large families don't realize when they've grown up with sourdough and they think, oh, sourdough is just the easiest bread to make, it's because that starter is constantly being used. It never hits the refrigerator. It's constantly refreshed because there's 16 pounds to feed, right? And
Yes.
so bread is gone in a day. And so when you take that ancient tradition, like I think commercial yeast is a product, I think, of the 1800s. I'm not
I don't know. I don't know when it came out, but it's
yeah,
not. It was, sourdough was
recent,
the original way.
right. And sourdough being not just yeast, but also lactobacilli, and it's a culture of
Right.
living organisms. And so
Right.
you decided, did you bake sourdough gluten bread first, or did you just go right
No,
into
I
gluten-free
went right
sourdough?
into gluten-free sourdough. That's where I
Wow.
started, and it was a fun journey. And I had loaves that came out really nice, which those are the only ones I took pictures of.
Isn't that the way it works though? Is because like I have actually reminded myself, oh wait, that loaf that was so hard that would break even my perfect like bulletproof teeth. I forgot to take a picture of that one.
Yeah. I had several that were like that, where the knife wouldn't even go through them. They were
Yeah.
good paperweights.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Or maybe
Used them as rocks in the garden.
Adobe bricks, rocks, right? You could have built a shed with them.
Yeah, yeah, but I enjoyed doing it, and it was a really good experience. But then we went through the pandemic and the lockdown and all
Mm,
of that, and then I got away from that after that was over because I was busy doing other things,
yeah.
visiting with my grandkids and stuff. I had other activities to do, and so more recently now I'm just making yeasted bread, which
Hmm.
is like my mother used to make,
Hmm.
and I enjoy that too. And I've been baking maybe once a week, but
Hmm.
as we run out of bread, I usually try to make one or two loaves a week.
That's really fun that you have allowed yourself the fluidity to change different styles and to set it down and to pick it back up in a different way. And also that you're recognizing, not because other people are telling you, oh, you should stop eating gluten or you should start eating gluten. You're letting your body tell you that.
Right. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And I'm not having any problem with eating it now, where before I would get a stomach ache, but I don't eat
Mhm.
as much of it either. I
Mhm.
used to eat way more bread. Now I
Mhm.
don't eat very much bread,
Mhm.
but it's working.
Well, that's great. I think any home that gets to have a fresh bread in it is a lucky home.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
I do want to congratulate you on those Instagram perfect loaves of bread, because they were really beautiful.
Thank you.
And I think, interestingly, how we respond to images of food as much as we respond to the taste and the experience of food, that there's something so visceral about seeing something that's been home cooked.
Yeah. Yeah. We uh Bob was just saying the other day, we went and got burgers from this burger shop.
Mm.
And as we were eating them, I said, "Are you liking it?" It was our first time to go there. We're in a new area. And so we were trying this burger shop. And we don't eat burgers very often, but we decided we would try it. And it looked really good. They looked yummy. But when we were eating them, we were like, this isn't all that great.
Interesting.
I'd rather we had them from cooking at home. And Bob said, yeah, your clean cooking is much better than this. So we don't eat out a lot. I cook most of the time.
Yeah.
Or
Yeah.
we make something quick and easy.
Right. And we're lucky to have microwaves in our modern life for that
Yes.
purpose.
Yes.
Wow. So thank you. We talked about bread, and let's see here. Can we cycle back to trees? Can we talk a little bit about trees in your life now, and how you interact with your friends and your tree friends?
Yes. We just, in the house that we moved into, this new house that we're in, it's not a brand new house, but it's new to us. There is a big tree in the front yard that I haven't gotten to know real well yet. My husband says it's a Modesto ash.
A Modesto ash. Is that a native ash to the Modesto area?
I don't know, but
Maybe,
it
huh?
probably is.
Yeah.
Anyway, she's dying.
I'm sorry.
She's old, and they've topped her too much.
Right.
And cut her back, and she's a huge tree, or was a huge tree, but she's been cut back. And all the houses on our block have one of these trees. I think when they made this development here, they put those in people's front yards, and they're all very, very large.
Wow.
But ours has been cut way back, and there are leaves on it, but there's branches also that are dying. So I love the tree. I care for her, but I don't feel a strong connection yet with her. And I think that she's sort of withdrawn and trying to heal herself, or just to stay alive.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's different from other places I lived. But we just planted a little lemon tree in the back. We took out a bush that was in the backyard, and we planted a lemon tree. In our other house, we had 18 fruit trees. And so we had fruit all year round, and those trees were very special to me. And I still go over there and enjoy being around all the trees. And right now the pomegranates are doing really well. And, I just had a very strong connection with all those trees, because they provided us with food, and they were giving to us. And I felt the need to constantly be in relation with them.
Can I interrupt you for just a moment, because I want to go back to the ash tree, ash, yes, in your front yard, and how important it is to recognize that trees are not just here for our enjoyment, healing, help, purpose. That to recognize she's sick, she's withdrawn, she's doing the best she can for herself, and like any other sentient being, that's how it works. And for you to recognize that, and to respect that, and to give her the space that she needs. And I'm using her because that's how you described her. I mean, I think trees can be like humans, anywhere on the spectrum from male to female, and a combination thereof. And then to talk about the other trees in your old home, and the orchard, and to be, so they were giving to you, much like your walnut tree friend from your childhood. And you were about to tell us about being in relationship, reciprocity with them. What does that mean? How do you do that with a tree?
Watering them, pruning them when they need it,
Mm.
picking up their fruit.
Mhm.
I felt people would ask me, neighbors would ask me why I did it the way I did it.
Mhm.
I didn't, when like fruit would fall on the ground, if it was not going to be eaten, people would say, well, why don't you rake it up and get rid of it? I said, because that's part of the tree.
Mm.
It used its nutrients. It's taken nutrients from the ground in order to produce this piece of fruit. And if I'm not going to eat it, then I need to give it back to the earth
Right.
so that it can replenish the tree. So I
Let it compost.
let it compost on the ground with the leaves. I always raked the leaves up under the tree if they were
Yeah.
blown, and didn't take them away.
Yeah.
It didn't need to be a sterile environment, and it needed to be a healthy environment for the tree.
Yeah.
And in nature, the fruit would fall on the ground. If the animals didn't eat it, it was left to compost there.
Right.
And
Right.
return to the soil so that it would replenish the soil. So
Right.
I felt like, I always tried to be respectful of the tree and its needs,
Mm.
and to not be abusive or to feel like it was there just for me. It
Mm.
had to take care of itself, and I needed to do what I could to take care of it. Especially when we've had the drought that we've had,
Mhm.
we didn't water lawn, but we watered our trees.
Right.
We didn't use our water, because water is so valuable right now in California.
Right.
Even for years, we didn't water our lawn. We let the lawn die, but the
Mhm.
trees got watered.
So the way you're talking about, Terry, the way you're talking about the relationship between you and the trees is very similar, if not the same, to the formula that you would apply to you and your human family members, or you and your animal family members. It's about recognizing the personhood of the tree, and that the tree has needs and a cycle of replenishing and giving, just like any of us do. We have a cycle of
Mhm.
being in gift and being in receptivity, and also rest, that we have a cycle of rest. So thank you for describing that. I think people know that, in their heart, but forget.
And I think a lot of times people don't think about it. They just see the tree as, they don't recognize the tree as, like I do, as a sentient being
Right.
that has they just don't. And I accept that. That's just where they're at. But for me, they are like my friend.
And I think that you and I and anyone else growing up in our culture are conditioned to say they are like my friends, but the honest reality is they are your friends, right?
Yes.
We put that like in there because we know the people that aren't used to thinking of it that way could feel like a disconnection with what we're saying,
Right.
unless we condition it. But it's actually, these are my friends.
That's right.
These are my friends. And to have had the gift in your childhood of the walnut trees, and your dad recognizing that relationship and building you a fort inside of the tree, it's just so special. I also grew up with a tree house, and my sister and I, our relationship with that tree was profound. The crabapple tree in our front yard.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And it was our uncle, our adopted uncle, who spent I don't know, a couple weeks one summer moving our jungle gym, which was a on the ground structure and had a little fort, moving that fort up into the tree, and measuring where the holes needed to go in order for the tree branches to come up through and still be level. It was a lot of work that he did.
Yeah. Yeah. That was that house, living in that house with all the walnut trees, was a very spiritual time in my life
How old were
because of
you
my
again?
connection.
You?
It was we lived there from the time I was 8 until I was 11. And my connection, that's when I first experienced trees as friends. And I connected with the earth and nature. We had a half-acre property where all these trees were, And then beyond the fence, there was a creek, and the kids in the neighborhood, we would all go out into this wild space. I spent a lot of time in wild space there. And at the end of the block, it was a dead end street that we lived on. And way at the end, there was the house at the end was like a big farmhouse, and they had cattle beyond
Oh,
their fence that were, out there. Well, we used to go out there, and there were these great big oak trees out in that what was their pasture area, but it was a huge area. And the cattle, you didn't necessarily always see them. So we would just go through the barbed wire fence and run around out there and visit with the trees and climb up in the trees and have a wonderful time out there. And then the cows would come,
Mm-hmm.
and there was a bull that used to chase us until we went back through the fence.
That's an adventure.
Yes, but it was a really wonderful time of being totally immersed and connected with wild nature.
Yeah.
And so that really was part and parcel of my spiritual connection to life.
And you've carried it forward with you your whole life.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
even in the time that you were getting 2 hours of uninterrupted sleep and some cat naps and working as an accountant in the middle of the night with your young children, you were still being fed by that.
Yes. Yes. And, it's always been important to me. And now here we are living close to the river, so I can be down there in wild space. It's very healing for me. It's very therapeutic for me all the time.
And I'm sure, so there's something very important about the fact that the trees there they have some elbow room, right? The trees along the river in that parkway.
Mm-hmm. They do.
So special. Gosh, Terry, we've covered a lot of ground. I'm just looking at this list that I started with. And we didn't specifically call it out, but you've also described in your storytelling here the process of growth, and that's a lifelong exploration.
Yes.
And also, let's see, there was another one. Storytell. Thank you for storytelling. You've woven a journey that we've been able to come along with you.
All right.
Yeah, thank you. Was there anything else you wanted to touch on as you were preparing for this unusual invitation to be on this podcast?
I hadn't really given it much thought. I thought that you would know what you wanted to talk about, and I didn't really think about it.
Yeah. Well, I feel complete. I feel so nourished by this sharing and so grateful.
I feel like it's been a wonderful opportunity to get to know you better too. That's great.
Thank you, Terry. Thank you. So